Welcome back to Behind the Play. My name is Alex Adams, and I'm very excited to be joined by the most handsome man covering the NHL and Kyle Bukauskas of Sportsnet. Thanks so much, Kyle, for taking the time and coming on.
Thanks. I feel there's a few that would dispute that title,
No,
but
no,
that's
no.
very kind of you to say, Alex. So yeah, I'll take it, I guess. Anyways.
Definitely the best hair. I'm sure you get that a lot.
Yeah, it's funny how it's kind of taken a life of its own. I've said in the past, like I don't know, even like through high school, like there was no sense of like, oh, I got to do my hair today. Like it was just not even something I thought of. So the fact that that's now kind of become part of what people associate with me, it's great. Like I'll take that over being the guy that sucks on air. So
Yeah, no, exactly.
it's a lot of fun.
Great. Well, I mean, you're definitely more than hair, so we'll get a bit to your career as well, Kyle. And I just want to normally on the show I ask the guests, especially journalists, kind of like when did they become like kind of wanting to go in this field? But sorry, there's a fly.
Yeah,
But
you
for
got
you, starting in Campbell River, BC, and then going to Sportsnet by the age of 20, so young, like how did that all come about for you?
Yeah, it was a lot of like right place, right time, and the right people were there. Like it just everything lined up in a real positive way, yeah, so early on for me that sometimes I still wonder how it all
Hmm.
kind of came about. But I mean, I did my broadcasting school in Calgary at the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology, or SAIT for those that are from around there. And so in my last year, there was a woman who like just happened to be filling in a mat lead position that that year, like my last year of school there. So she was only there the 1 year also. And so she was her position that she was filling in was like communications for the athletic department, and part of her role was trying to find mainly like students from my program to do like the commentary because they had webcast all the varsity games for friends and family, whoever that wanted to tune in from around the world, and essentially they could do it. Um, so that's how she got familiar with my work because I did as much of that as I could when I was going to school there. And towards the end, she mentioned, she said, "Well, I don't know if I told you this before, but my dad's the news director at Sportsnet, and I was back home visiting over reading week, and I had mentioned you and kind of you were interested in sports and." To him, and he wants to see some of your work. So I mean, at that time, I just thought like it would be the most cool thing to have someone in that position just provide some feedback because I'd been putting together a demo tape. I was a couple months away from graduating, and it was time to start kind of putting some feelers out there for jobs. And I sent the tape off to him, and he got back to me a few days later, and said some good things and things to work on, and I thought this is awesome. And he'd asked, what, I understand you're finishing school soon, like what do you have planned going forward? And I just still not thinking anything of it, like nothing yet. I'm just starting to apply, and we'll see where it goes. But a day later, on a Saturday, I get an email from a guy by the name of Scott Moore, who I didn't know at the time, but he was the president of broadcasting for Rogers Media then, and so he said that he had the demo reel passed on to him, and that he wanted to bring me out to Toronto for an interview and an audition. And so yeah, I mean I was still 19 at the time, I was
Wow.
still in school, and so yeah, like it just felt, I don't know, it was such a out of body experience reading that for the first time because you're told when you go into school, especially if you want to get to a bigger market, let alone like the mecca of sports media in this country. Like you've got to play the long game. You got to start small. And I was totally cool with that. I'm like, yeah, absolutely you do. Like that makes total sense. And so to see that, it was like, man, all of a sudden you're everything kind of went into fast forward. It felt like, in a sense. So that's kind of how I got my foot in the door there. A few months later, I flew out to Toronto, and I met with Scott. I met with Mike English, the news director at the time there that first saw my tape, and got to interview with a few people, did a little audition in studio there, like right after Hazel made it, like her 6 p.m. Sportsnet Connected. So that was like really surreal, like going in the same studio that she had just done a national show in, jib camera coming across. It was like, wow, we're not doing the school newscast anymore. Yeah, and then so I waited over the summer to see what was going to happen, if they were going to hire me or ultimately go in another direction. And kind of late August, they said, okay, we'll move you out to Toronto. And so I left for there at the end of September and started October 1 that year. And yeah, it's been almost 10 years now that's gone by. It's been gone by really quick.
What was the first thing they put you on? What was it a game? Was it Sportsnet Connected? What did you start off with?
Well, I didn't start on the air right away. And it's funny, it shows you about how, I guess now in hindsight, how long ago it really was. Like I think my first day, I think I probably just hung out in the newsroom, met some people. It was a very kind of information taking in type day. And then I think the next day was like the Raptors media day. And you think now, like, that's a huge production where we send like our features team down, like they're cranking out sit down interviews. Like there's a whole day around, like back when, Tim and Said still had their show, like they would do a live show from there. I believe they have in the past. Like it's a big day now, Raptors media day. Back then they're like, oh, we'll send the new guy and a camera down there. You can just stick the mic in the scrums. This was before the We the North movement took hold. So that was one of my first. Pardon me.
I think that was the first. Like it was right before.
It was the first year. Like that was the year where, like in December, it was like, okay, because Messiah had just come in. Were they going to blow it all up? And then they ended up, and it seemed like they were attempting to blow it up. They brought Drake in as the global ambassador, and they attempted to blow it all up by trading Rudy Gay to Sacramento. And then all of a sudden they became a much better team after that and got in the playoffs and took Brooklyn to 7 games. So yeah, that was my first assignment. I wasn't, as I said, it was a few months before I actually appeared on air. But yeah, that was day one.
And what was that? What was your first on air appearance?
It was like a Leafs off day practice. And it was, that was the year that they had Bernier and James Reimer. They were kind of the tandem. Yeah. And the night before they had, I don't know, forget who they played. Maybe they lost to Detroit or someone. And that was and Bernier started, and that was in the scrum afterwards. I don't know if he had given up a bad goal or if he had a few behind him. And he was asked in the scrum afterwards about, were you glad that they left you in till the end of the game? And he's like, what do you mean? He goes, that you didn't get pulled. And he goes, well, why would I get pulled? And there was like that awkward. So that was like the next day afterwards. So that was it was just like a report filed for Connected that night. So that was the first time.
And how did you kind of, like, obviously you've been there for like almost 10 years, or I guess we're at 10 years now, but just how did you get started on Hockey Night in Canada? Was doing kind of pre-game, post-game and interview, was that something you wanted to do? Just talk a little about that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, honestly, when I first kind of decided I wanted to pursue, this career path, I hadn't thought at all about Hockey Night in Canada or like working in NHL broadcast or anything of the sort. Like I thought like that was the pros over there. That was a completely different world. The dream for me was to be on the anchor desk and to be reading highlights late at night. Because I mean, I grew up on Jay and Dan, and there's a guy out west by the name of Don Taylor that worked for Sportsnet for a lot of years, and he was brilliant with how he read highlights. So that's what I wanted to be like. But I started in October, and like mid-November, so like 6 weeks into my time at Sportsnet, the big announcement that Rogers has a 12-year national rights holder agreement with the National Hockey League, and I was like, holy crap! Like all of a sudden now, this place I just started working at is going to be the home of the NHL for over 10 years. So that was kind of step one. It was like, all of a sudden I'm working at the place that has the games. And then summer of 2016, there was some major shakeups at our shop, and they needed a new rinkside host in Montreal, because we still had the regional package at the time. And I was living in Ottawa back then. My first go around living in Ottawa. And yeah, I got a call one day. I'd gone back to the island. My brother had just graduated high school, so I went back to there for his prom and grad and all that. And I got a phone call. I was flying back to Ottawa. I was connecting through Vancouver, land in Vancouver. I got a phone call, and they say, hey, we would like you to move to Montreal and to host the Canadiens games for us. So that was like the first chance to be on an NHL show. And then with that, even, then the schedule comes out. I remember that fall, that September was the World Cup of Hockey in Toronto.
Yeah.
And so I was there for a couple of weeks covering that. And so the schedule comes out for the first part of the year for the broadcast. And I just remember opening it, and like, we started that season in Buffalo. Montreal played there on a Thursday night, and then they played in Ottawa on the Saturday, the first hockey night in Canada of the season. And I just saw, like, nobody gave me a heads up or nothing. I just looked at the schedule, and like, there's my name next to Bob Cole and Gary Galley doing the game.
Oh my
And
God.
I was like, all right, Saturday. So that was another day I'll never forget. And then it just, that was such a critical year, working with, so it was John Bartlett and Jason York were the commentators in the booth for the Canadians back then, and a producer by the name of Scott Lennox, like our group there, and the late Blair Tetro, he directed a lot of our games. He passed away just over a year ago now. But it was a really, really fun team. Nash Zakaria did the stats for us. It was just a great environment to be in, to learn, to kind of have some freedom with how we wanted to do the shows. Like, we had to fill a lot of our intermissions, so coming up with ideas of how to fill the gaps in that way was a huge step for me. And then after that year, they said, okay, we'd like you to host Leafs games, the majority of Leaf games on Saturdays. And it's just kind of a little more each and every year since.
How do you approach hosting games and doing the interviews? Like, what's kind of your process? If you can give us a bit of the behind the scenes of how you work.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's not like kind of one way of thinking. I worked with a producer for a lot of years by the name of Shirley Najak, and he's been like the greatest mentor I've ever had. And I've been fortunate to work with a lot of really wonderful people and still do. But he was so instrumental in just kind of changing my thinking around all of that, like in terms of this, because a lot, there's interviews, of course, but there's also like storytelling throughout the show that we try to do as well. And so he's a big, he's big on, feel, like what feels right, big on tone. How do you present yourself in certain situations in terms of like the level in your voice, the warmth in your voice? Are you a little more straightforward? Can you be a little more playful in certain times? Always under the filter of clever when we can. So all of that factored in. It was such a wonderful learning experience to try to get into the same headspace as he was. And I, of course, I don't think anyone can be in the same mindset that he can get to. He's in a world of his own. But it was a really, really great time just to learn. And so now, like, it's, a lot of it is, what feels right, what makes sense. And I probably agonized the most over like that first kind of 7 o'clock whip around where they go to all the reporters for the early games. Ron does the tease plays. Ron comes on camera, does his opening in studio, and then throws it off to the different reporters depending on how many games we have at 7 o'clock on a given Saturday. So that 30 to 45 seconds is like, we really gotta hit it out of the park there, to depending on what we're talking about, like what's the storylines that's worth hitting there, the content, that is there video included, is there sound, is there pictures, a graphic, all of it. So that can be one that probably occupies my mind the most. And then the interviews, I don't know, like, I mean, you want to be obviously well researched and be in the know of what's going on. I mean, it helps having done it for a couple of years now. You kind of get to know the players in terms of their tendencies in interviews, like certain lines of questionings where you feel you can get more out of them, and still being respectful of wherever their minds may be at a given time in the intermission, at the start of warmups, what have you. So just kind of trying to read the room, if you will, there. And then it's like, for the stuff that we do in games, like the little stories out of a commercial break going to commercial, when there's a stoppage in play and enough time to squeeze something in, you're just kind of throughout each week gathering things that could possibly fit there. Like, we never really, like, between me and Jeff Giordats, the producer I work with primarily now, we never put a cap on how many different stories we want to have come to the table with. Certainly, the more the better, I think, without going too crazy. But just whatever makes sense, and then you kind of let the game decide when certain stories gets in, because not all of them are going to. There's just not enough time usually, and if I don't get in a lot during a game, then that usually means that the game's really good. Like there's too much happening on the ice that's like we got to show that instead of having me jibber jabber for 12 seconds. So that means the game's good. So that's kind of it. Like there's different kind of areas that we all touch on. Is what's the opening look like? What is our in-game kind of list of stories? And then the interviews are kind of more so just in real time, like you're reacting to what's going on, and having kind of the background of whoever you're speaking to, hopefully going in, and trying to ask the right questions in the moment.
And how do you manage? Well, two things. The first one is, how do you get them to open up? I mean, especially hockey players, not trying to offend any, but they're not necessarily the best interviews per se. How do you get them to open up? And I know you have the famous Brad Marchand incident a couple years ago. How do you manage those relationships with players, especially when you interview them? And what happened, like, especially with that, like what happens if they get upset at you? Is there a give and take? Like, how do you have those relationships with players, and how do you get them to open up?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess you just try to, treat them respectfully. I certainly try to approach the line of questioning. Like I never want to feel like they're being backed into a corner, or I'm trying to get them to say something specific. I don't know. Like that's probably a better question for the players. Like I wish, because I mean, certainly there's some players that just aren't comfortable in those situations or don't like doing them, and that's fine. And there's no, like I can try like heck. We all try like heck, and you just don't quite get much out of them, and that's okay. Yeah, and that's okay. But yeah, and then in terms of kind of managing when things go south, like I remember one year when I did the games in Montreal, it was Subban's first game back in Montreal after being traded to Nashville. We interviewed Shea Weber in the first intermission, and I asked just like it was a really dumb question. I mean, it was two questions, and the interview probably in totality maybe lasted 13 seconds.
Oh my God.
Like he doesn't have, he's a man of few words. I mean, at the best of times in front of the camera. But there it was like, he had better places to be, and speaking to me was not one of them. So anyway, I was like, oh man, I felt really bad about it. I was like, because I'm going, why did you do that? That was dumb. And so a few days later, we were in Vancouver. They just had an off day practice. And so I went up to him in the room afterwards, and I apologized. I said, that was bad question, bad timing for me at that time. Like, shouldn't have put you in that spot. And he was like, oh, like, don't worry about it. He goes, that was on me. Like I'd taken a bad penalty late in the period. I was pissed off about that. Like I was ready to crack a stick over a wall kind of thing. And then like our working relationship was never better after that. So I think, and Elliot Friedman, taught me that lesson, and that if a player, has a problem with, something that you, like a question you ask, or, in his case, something that he writes, like, make yourself available, show your face, be at the rink. And then if again, that there's a problem, like try to have that conversation where, okay, let's talk it out here. Tell me what you had an issue with. I'll give you my perspective on it. And that seems to be, the best way to work through it. Because I mean, by and large, like they're all good guys that are understandable. They know the role we play. And so I think if you're able to keep that line of communication open, where when things do go south, it's like, all right, let's hit the brakes here for a second and figure out what went wrong. Then I think you've got a path to having a better relationships with players going forward.
I want to take this podcast in a quick detour, because I've had a lot of people when they found out that you were coming on ask me to ask you about Charles Barkley
Oh
and
yeah.
and him talking about your hair. I think he called you the Canadian Tom Brady.
Yes.
And I think you said that you actually defer and say that Ryan Reynolds is the Canadian Tom Brady. So maybe just tell us about that whole experience of Charles Barkley. I think it was at the Stanley Cup Finals last year, right? So
It was, yeah. It was like a career highlight. We knew we'd heard he was going to be at the game, and so we put in the request to interview him. He was good to do it, and it was funny. Like we went up in the second intermission, and because of where he was situated, like he was in the suite he was in. Like it wasn't in a location where like one of our broadcast cameras could actually get their lens on it. So we had to go up with one of our news cameras that we had down there with us and like do it live to tape. And they had to run down to our broadcast truck and then like play the interview back before the period started. So that's the thing. Like the interview wasn't live. We just had to pretend it was. And so I think he was, your 2 periods of hockey in. The game started at 8 o'clock local. So, I mean, he was pretty well hydrated at that point. Yeah. So he was in a very, I think he's pretty friendly to begin with. He was very friendly at that point. And so I think that's probably why the compliments were coming fast and furious and all that. So it was great. Like he was so welcoming to me and made me feel comfortable because I think he probably knew that I'm going, holy bleep, like this is Charles Barkley here. Like I was nervous to talk to him. I didn't want to screw it up. But he made me feel so comfortable. And it was great to listen to him. Like, I mean, he's guaranteed money. Like anytime you put a microphone in front of him, like it's entertainment. And so that was really cool. And then we had him on again during the Cup final this past year. He was down in Florida at one of the games, and it was just he was awesome again. So yeah, if I get a chance to talk to him a third time, I will certainly take it because it's just as I say, it's guaranteed like must see TV. Like you just let him go, and he's got something he wants to talk about, and it's gonna put a smile on your face.
Yeah, those must be like the easiest interviews for you, other than the time that you start blushing because he's complimenting you. But
right.
With that, because we talked about the hair, and obviously Charles agrees about your hair. How important do you find aesthetics, and especially when you're on TV? Like, do you really focus on that when you go on TV of how you look, and how important is that for like a visual form in TV? To look a certain way when you're on the broadcast?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like I guess the hair, I almost feel obligated to like, you got to make sure it's put together. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
You got to make sure the hair is, excuse me, everything's in place for it.
Yeah.
Because I guess it's like, it's part of the shtick now, I suppose. But I don't know. Beyond that, you try to look presentable. Obviously, wearing a suit, make sure the tie, the knots, like a nice and snug. It's up to the collar. There isn't a gap there. Just little things like that. And it's more so just my own, like, because I mean, even playing hockey growing up, you'd wear a suit and tie to games.
Yeah.
And I was like that then. Just that feeling of, okay, if you're gonna do it, make sure everything looks nice and crisp. And but yeah, I guess the importance of it, I suppose, like I remember the one thing we were taught in school, whereas if you've got something hanging off you, and even when I'm watching TV, like I'll notice, like say if a guy's got like a loose earpiece that's hanging over his shoulder when he's on a desk or something, like I see that, and now I'm distracted and I'm missing what he's actually saying. I'm going, put the earpiece away. You got to do a better job hiding it. So I think if everything's kind of together, then there's just, I think, less distractions for the viewer potentially to look at.
Well, I'm here in Ottawa, and I know you live here too, but I'll definitely check. I think it's Dino. Is that the guy you go to?
Yes, yeah,
And
Fernandino
and
Salon.
I
Yeah.
know I've heard that you use two specific products. Is it possible you can share those, or are those state secrets for you, Kyle?
No, there's no secrets here. But I mean, it kind of changes over the years. I don't know. I feel
Okay.
every few years, like my hair just gets uh
It
fine. It's built up a
times.
resistance to whatever I've got thrown at it. So I got to get something different. But I use like this like Layrite. That's the brand name. Like it's like
Okay.
a pomade.
Okay.
So that goes in first, and then I just put a little bit of like the Davinus. It's like a molding clay to just
Oh,
kind of, especially when I'm working and on TV, like just to really kind of hammer it into place there, so that hopefully I don't have to worry about it throughout the night.
has there ever been a time where it's kind of been like kind of folding apart at the end, and you're worrying a bit and kind of
A little, yeah, yeah. There's the odd time where, yeah, second intermission, you go to the washroom or something, you catch a look in your mirror, and it's like things kind of lean in. You're like, oh God, come on, just keep it together. The hard part here in Ottawa, as you know, like when you go to a game here, like
oh,
even
such a
like
long.
such a long walk, and
Yeah.
it's like the windiest part of the Ottawa Valley,
Yeah.
the walk across Palladium Drive over to the arena. And we don't have, like, the players obviously get to park right down by the loading dock there. There's a short walk in for them, but for us, we're on the other side of the street too, so we got to make the long trek into the building each night. So yeah, when it's the winds are howling late January, -20 out,
No,
there's a bit of worry.
I remember one game watching, I think it was like it was like January, one of those cold like -30 nights, and all of a sudden I just see Jamie McClellan and Gordon Miller running. I guess they had a game the next night, so just running across the
Right.
parking lot and
Yeah.
in Canada
Get
was
out of there as quick as
definitely an
possible. Yeah.
experience. Before I'm gonna ask you before I'll go, I'm gonna ask you some fun questions, but just what advice would you give to journalists coming up in the industry? It's obviously very competitive, and not, a
Mhm.
lot of people are getting laid off, especially in the writing realm. Just what advice would you give to young sports journalists specifically?
Yeah, it's hard, like, because I wish I had the answers, but the fact is, like, it's tough to get a sense of where the industry really is going. I mean, clearly it's shrinking in the more traditional mediums, and as podcasts have become more and more popular and certainly more lucrative, that's great. But like, where is kind of the future there? I don't know. I would say, like, I guess the more versatile you are, um, that certainly helps a lot. But you also have to have, like, what you are, right? Like,
Mm.
as great as being the jack of all trades, master of none, like, there should be something where you go, like, I know I can get that guy to do this because he's really, or she is really good at it. So to try to find that balance there. And the great thing is, like, the fact that you're able to do, regardless of where you're at in terms of experience, um, how early you are going on in your career, if you're just thinking about it, like doing things like this is, I mean, it's so easy to do now,
Mhm.
to have your own podcast or to have a YouTube show or whatever it is. You can do all of that at home. And then I think, just in terms of approach and mindset and all that, it's being somebody that others enjoy working with. Like, it's okay to say I don't know. Like, I know, like, for a young person, you're coming in, you want to have all the answers, you're eager, but it's okay to kind of just allow, the whole process to take hold. Allow those that have been around longer to help you along the way. um, like, I know certainly for me, looking back, was I truly ready to be like a rinkside host for the Montreal Canadiens? Probably not.
Okay.
And I made a lot of mistakes along the way.
Of
But
course.
I think because I was determined to be as prepared as possible, each show we did, my work ethic was never going to be an issue. Like, I wanted to make sure that the crew could trust me, that I was going to bring what I needed to the table each game. So I think as the mistakes came and went, like, I think there's still a feel of, we're willing to work with this kid because he's determined to get better. So I find if you're able to have that approach with a lot of things early on, I think that sets you up well, and it creates a good reputation for oneself, which is important because it is a very small business in the grand scheme of things. And I go back to the Elliot Friedman line that the right people are always watching. So if you're constantly doing your best effort in whatever it is, there should be some hope, some tangible hope and belief that the opportunity to do something that ultimately you thought is what you wanted will be there at some point down the road.
Well, that's very well said, and I think a lot of journalists on the show have mentioned how small a world it is, and
Yeah.
things get around. So I think treating people the right way sounds and working your butt off sounds like a good advice to people. So thanks for sharing,
Yeah.
Kyle. And I want to ask you a couple fun questions. And the first one is, if Kyle, tomorrow Sportsnet comes to you and says, actually, Gary Bettman's resigning and you're the commissioner of the NHL, what rule would you change on your first day in office?
Oh, that's a good one. Maybe I'll try to be. I'll go for a little more drastic here.
Okay.
I would try like let's get rid of offsides.
Wow. Okay. I heard that recently as well. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
did, eh? Okay.
Yeah.
Where I
So
feel we're already moving to kind of this positionless hockey, slowly but surely. So let's take offsides out of the equation.
yeah. Okay.
And see where that goes.
So it's not the offside review. It's literally just you get rid of it. You're done.
Right.
We're just gonna go kind of shinny style.
Yeah. We'll keep the
Okay.
icings.
Okay.
We'll keep the hybrid icings.
Okay.
But and you can keep the blue lines for aesthetic purposes. But offsides, no more.
I like it. And in your career, have you been to every NHL arena, like with Seattle and Vegas now? Have you been to every arena?
I've been to Seattle. I have not been to the Climate Pledge.
Okay.
I haven't been to the Arizona State arena. I think that might be the only two.
Okay. So you said you went to Climate Pledge, or you haven't been to
I have not been. No.
Okay. So out of the arenas you've been to, what is your favorite place to cover a game?
It's tough to beat a Saturday night in Montreal.
Wow. Okay.
It really is. Vegas is awesome for all the reasons you think it would be. They just put on a heck of a show. So even if you're working a game, you feel like you're being entertained. But those are the two at the top for me.
Mm-hmm. And with, obviously, you were at the Stanley Cup Finals this year. What was that like for you? And how good do you think is it for the game that it was two markets in Vegas and Florida that aren't necessarily the big markets in the Stanley Cup Finals?
Yeah, I think in terms of the Sun Belt storyline and all that, I just found like it was two really good stories, like regardless of kind of where they play. And I think the whole purpose is to grow the game, right? And you think about some of the conversation with a buddy about this the other day, think about like the Team USA, like Miracle 1980. I mean, it was basically you had players from Minnesota and you had players from the Boston area, right? Like that was it. Because those are the kind of the two hockey hotbeds in the States from a collegiate perspective. And now you got players coming to the NHL from all over.
Yeah.
Because the league is expanded and there's been success in other parts of the US, and Canada's just been hockey's been a part of the fabric for so long already. But that's another good example. I mean, it was too bad at the end that it ended up being kind of a lopsided series and a big blowout in Game 5. I think from those that love the drama, maybe you wanted something a little tighter, but the right team won. I think in the end, Vegas was the better team. I don't know. I mean, it was great for us traveling back and forth between Las Vegas, Nevada, and down in Florida between Fort Lauderdale and Sunrise. There, we were we we were very spoiled in that sense. So I'm happy to go work games. Well, work games anywhere, but particularly where the weather's nice.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like you need to wear your suit other than just being inside the arena, probably. But
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a good one. Before I let you go, just the Sens. Obviously, you're here in Ottawa. You cover the team, or you're at a lot of games. How do you feel about the new ownership, and just the direction of the team going forward?
Yeah, it seems like the Michael Andlauer era, once it gets going officially, like it feels like that was ultimately the best outcome. Like it would have been awesome
Yeah,
if Ryan Reynolds is part of it, and the whole circus in a good way that comes along with that. But I think, after, as folks in Ottawa know, the Eugene Melnyk years, especially when things got hairy in the second half of his ownership tenure, there was just a lot of needless noise and drama that I think clearly, obviously, the fans were fed up with, and we saw tangible evidence of that. But so I think you've got a respected guy who's been in hockey, obviously with his history with the Montreal Canadiens and the Hamilton Bulldogs, who I think operates in a little more of a quieter sense.
yeah.
And so I think that's a great thing for this franchise right now, especially as they're into the mode of now we're trying to get into the playoffs every year and look at the Stanley Cup. They've gone through the teardown and trying to make good on their high draft picks, and so they've got a lot of good players now, and they're in a position where it feels like the expectation absolutely is playoffs. It's the longest stretch without it that they've gone in franchise history, which is kind of crazy to think of when you think back to how poor of a hand they were dealt to start as an expansion franchise in 1992, and like how bad some of those teams were in the early years. But they didn't go 6 years without miss, and this current crop, the last few years, that's been the reality here. So I think the fan base deserves it. I think back to the back-to-back games in Ottawa here against Detroit, where it felt like, okay, are you going to make a push for the playoffs, or are you going to go quietly again and fall into that 12-13 spot in the conference? And they swept them aside. What was it, 6-1, 6-2? They beat them. It was like a straight sex tennis win.
Yeah.
And I just to feel the buzz around the building, it's something I hadn't felt in Ottawa since working their playoff run, a bit of it in 2017. So it was neat to see that again, to the fire within the fan base. And now we'll see once Andlauer. I can't see him coming in and being like changes in terms of bringing in different people in the front office or whatever it may be. But it'll be interesting to see once he gets settled, starts talking to people around the organization about what's working, what's not, what's keeping them from taking the next step, and then ultimately what he decides to do moving forward. It's going to be really, really fascinating to watch, because I can't see it being status quo, but I think it'll take some time, I think, before those decisions are made.
Well, I'm definitely excited for, just a steady hand is probably the best way to describe it. It seems like
Sure.
Bringing in and spending as much money as they can, it seems, to make the team good, which always helps. But which Canadian team? Obviously, I think you basically every year you're at every Canadian team's game and hosting. Which do you think will be the best Canadian team next year?
I got to think Edmonton. It feels like you just see it in their body language, their tone after losing out to Vegas. Like I think and I guess in hindsight they were probably right to think so. Like if they had beaten them, they had a really good chance at winning the cup. I think in a lot of ways they are right there. You never know, but I think with McDavid, with Draisaitl, and as that team has gotten a little deeper, like it's not just those two so much anymore. Certainly on a lot of nights it is, but there's a little more around them now than there had been in the past. It just seems like they're on that trajectory. Like they get to the third round 2 years ago, and they ran into a Colorado team that was not losing that year, and then felt probably that they were good enough to beat Vegas, but all of a sudden the series slips away on home ice. So now you go through the whatever debrief you got to do to reset yourself over the off season, and I think it feels like Edmonton has the best shot as of right now. I don't like doing the predictions much about who do you think is going to make the playoffs and all that, because it's like, well, how is anyone supposed to know? But it feels like, just in terms of where they're at and kind of their trajectory, they're in a spot to really be a serious threat to win it all.
So
Somebody, please just do it. It's been
yeah.
like
And that's good for
30
you
years.
Sportsnet too, obviously. I'm sure the Habs playoff run was fun for you guys as well.
It was great, but it was just such a weird
COVID,
time, because I mean, they're like, well, we can only have 6,000 people in here or whatever it was, but we can have 50,000 standing outside. Like, it was just such a bizarre, obviously
weird.
with the all Canadian division and how it was all set up. Like, it didn't feel like a true Canadian Stanley Cup run. It was special in its own unique way, but it different for sure.
Yeah. I don't have an elite prospects page, and I believe you do, for Campbell River. And I know you played at a pretty high level. Kyle, and I think you made the BC, or is it the Island Championships? I read somewhere that you guys did very well one year. But for you, Kyle, which NHL player is your player comp in terms of the way they play compared to your game?
Yeah. Well, actually, actually had that one time, I think my first year of in the under 18 team that we were on. They went through and I had all the different NHL players, like the coaching staff went through and had a list of all the NHL players, and we had to kind of guess, okay, which on our team is most like a certain player. Anyway, I was linked to Eric Stahl.
Okay.
And Eric Stahl in his prime, but I was still, I don't know. I think Eric Stahl, I think, still too smart a player. Obviously, I mean, he's played in the NHL, and I had never got there, but I could see kind of what they were thinking, just as kind of a taller centerman. I don't know. It's tough to say. Maybe I was a little bit, now in hindsight, I was maybe a little more like Jordan Stahl. Probably not as heavy, but just in the sense that, like, I killed penalties. I took great pride in face-offs, and even in my first year there, where I wasn't quite good enough to, especially when it came around to playoff time, and we weren't a very good team anyways, but I was probably like the 13th forward on that team, but I was like the face-off get-off guy in the defensive zone.
Cool.
But anyway, so that's kind of how I was. But I kind of have to, I chuckle and I feel sheepish about the fact that I don't even know how I got an elite prospects page, because I think it's making me out to like I was a much better hockey player than I ever really was. Like, we in my hometown of Campbell River, like my age group, I mean, there were some good rep teams that came through there. My age group was never one of them. And then we had 1 year where everything kind of came together. My second year on the U18 team, where we won the Island Championship there. And it was just, it was a great feeling, just because all we had done our whole childhood up until that point was lose. Like, we didn't come anywhere close to playing in a Island Championship. So that was a whole new experience for us, and getting to go to provincials and experience the whole thing there. But yeah, other than that, it was a lot of, you can ask my parents, there were a lot of long nights in the rink watching their boy get absolutely beat to hell by other teams up and down the island, and then having to drive all the way back afterwards. And I'm sure they had much better things to do with their time, but I appreciate that they allowed me to keep doing it.
When you won, were you able to give the Island trophy to Rod Bridmore? Was that something you kind of paraded in Campbell River with Rod?
No, it's funny. Yeah, his trophy was slightly bigger when he won in 2006 than the one that we got. So they'd set up a whole parade, and everyone got to come through the kind of downtown square there to get their photo with it. But yeah, for whatever reason, they didn't offer the same kind of celebration throughout the whole city for us there. But no, that's okay.
Well, thank you so much, Kyle, for taking the time and doing this. I just want to give you the floor. What's coming up for you at Sportsnet? I actually saw you at the Rogers Cup last year, so I don't know if you're going to be there
You
again.
did? Oh, okay.
I did. You're on the court, the second court in Montreal. You were interviewing for.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's my home on the
Yeah,
B court. So
yeah.
yeah, it's actually, and it's called the National Bank Open now.
That
They flipped
yeah,
it.
that's it. Yeah, I keep
Uh,
saying Rogers Cup, but it's like 2 years of that, but I still can't. This is a promo for Sportsnet.
yes, yeah. Well, we've got that. The main draw starts on August 7th, so we'll be in Toronto with the men's tournament this year, and so that'll be fun. It's honestly one of my favorite weeks of the year. Love doing hockey. Don't get me wrong, but the athleticism, the talent you get to see up close there. I mean, they're long days, and typically in very warm weather.
Mhm.
But man, it's such a treat to watch those guys pound that ball back and forth over the net.
Mhm.
They are so good at what they do. So that's what I've got. I got a week coming up here next month of watching tennis up close on the B court, and then before that, getting married here in just over a
Congratulations.
week. So that's the most important thing going on right now in my life, and then we'll gear up for the tennis after that.
Well, I look forward to watching you on Sportsnet as a married man, and I really appreciate you taking the time, Kyle, and doing this. I had a lot of fun, and have a great wedding and great summer, and yeah, just look forward to as well seeing you in the fall and covering the NHL and the Sens and everything at Sportsnet. So thanks so much for taking the time.
Yeah, of course, Alex. This was a treat, man. Thanks very much for having me.